somewhere in the northern hemisphere, waiting out the alien apocalypse. He is armed with a machete and a microphone. This is the Alien Outpost. Are you ready?
Pleasure and honor to interview my man, my bro. He is the paranormal rock star. He is the myth, the legend. And I like to say that he is my friend. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
So we're going to talk about a little bit about the alien, and I guess you could say New World Order connection to, because I think it all connects. A lot of your books do connect. It's just like a jigsaw puzzle. And they fit perfectly well whenever you start analyzing certain things, like when you talk about the ancient origins, you talk about the bloodlines, you talk about UFOs, and now the New World Order. You have so many books, but once you start reading these books, you understand the bigger picture here. So with the New World Order, or the Cabal, the elite, whatever you want to call them, there's many names, Illuminati. How far back do you think this bloodline goes? Because I'm a firm believer that a lot of the powers that shouldn't be have the certain bloodline that go back to centuries.
Well, I think when a lot of people talk about New World Order, they think of this government or that government orchestrating world events on a secret scale, if you like. But I think when you sort of look deeper into it, it's actually not necessarily elected governments that are responsible, for the way in which the world is going right now. I think the more you look into it, you find that the real power players, if you like, are not so much the elected officials, but the people who are heavily involved with sort of ancient powerful families, banking, or secret societies, organizations that are not in the public eye, so to speak, but which operate very much in the shadows, but they're incredibly powerful with these ancient lineages, banking connections, old money, that kind of thing. And I think it's very easy for these kind of people to insert themselves into government and to influence government to the point where the New World Order scenario starts to begin. And because these people do work their way inside the government itself, or governments, it looks like that it's actually the government that is orchestrating all this. But I actually don't think that is the case. I think we do really need to look back at these ancient families, old money, power groups, banking, etc., etc. And I think those are the ones that are really trying to manipulate things, everything from, sort of 100% surveillance of the population, fear factors, just creating fear and paranoia. And the disturbing thing is, it's quite easy to do that, and easy to influence people via the media. You don't really need to do too much to actually achieve that particular goal.
Exactly. And you also talk about television within your New World Order book. And yes, there is definitely, that is a very, I guess you could say, propaganda weapon for the elite. And it is, I believe, much easier to control people nowadays with all the media platforms, internet, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, cable television, everything. And so you mentioned with the black budget money before also. Now, what exactly are they doing with this black budget money? Are they doing a lot of secret things behind the scenes, like maybe amping up the military, and also Eisenhower talked about the military-industrial complex? Or are they actually working, I don't want to get too much into it right now, like the secret space program and working towards breakaway civilization?
Well, I think as far as the whole black budget angle is concerned, and for people who don't know, I'm sure there aren't that many, but for people who don't know what we mean by the term black budget, it's basically massive amounts of funding which cannot be traced, which isn't sort of delegated through and via the regular government. It comes through alternative means, and it's very, very hard to follow the money, so to speak. But in terms of where we're going today, I mean, you mentioned briefly the whole sort of secret space program. I think that is a part of it. I'd be very surprised if there haven't been clandestine space missions. But I think one of the areas which is receiving massive amounts of funding is this angle of surveillance. I mean, you mentioned TV. Now, TV is the definitive propaganda unit, so to speak, to control people. But what I would also say is that in the last couple of years, the TV has become something even more, particularly with smart TVs, where essentially they are very easy to hack into. If you're sitting in your living room, you've got a smart TV, and you're talking with your friends about this, about that, you don't like this, what the state of the world, etc. It's not at all impossible for anyone to hack, if they know how to do it, to hack into that TV and basically listen in. It's kind of in the same way of somebody hacking your laptop, and you've got your microphone on, you've got your camera on, and in essence your office, or wherever your laptop is wide open. And it's the same issue with smart TVs and and certain other technologies which are now being developed. You can have them in the home, ask questions of these devices, and they'll answer you.
I have one too, Amazon Alexa.
Okay.
Some of my friends say you shouldn't have that thing because it's pretty damn smart, Nick. It is pretty much. Yeah. It is very close to AI, artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, I've used one at a friend's house, and she got it almost immediately when it came out. And it is cool technology, but it's like any technology, it can be abused, I mean, and of course, for the most part, nobody's listening. But I mean, if you're someone who perhaps the government, wants to listen to this person or that person, they've got a smart TV, they've got a laptop, they've got other devices that can be hacked into. Before you realise it, every aspect of your life is being watched. And it's so easy to do it. And so I think that a lot of the funding, the black budget funding today, is going on just making sure that everybody eventually is just going to be watched, and people are going to be frightened to talk about this or that in their own home. And it's almost like, well, where's it going to end,
I don't want to sound too paranoid. No matter what happens, I'm not going to stop doing what I do. No. Talking about the things I talk about. Yeah. And if somebody was going to be watched, I would say it would definitely be you, Nick, because you talk about a lot of things that might be pushing a lot of buttons. You talk about the New World Order, you talk about secret societies, Illuminati, Bloodlines, UFOs, everything. Things that maybe they don't want to get out.
Well, I think for the most part that anybody who sort of has a role in, revealing secrets, or, you're even just using the Freedom of Information Act, things like that, I can understand how somebody on the inside would say, well, why are they doing that? What are they? Who are they? That
kind of thing. About this right here.
Yeah. So I'm sure that everybody in sort of the UFO field, conspiracy field, to a degree, is watched, and background checks are made just to see, what it is you're doing or what it isn't you're doing, and to what extent you might be doing it. I think for the most part, we probably are in this field sort of surveyed. the big question is, to what extent, and I'm sure a lot of it today, because if you write in a book or an article online, the days of having to sort of, quote, spy on someone are actually gone. They can just check out your Facebook page, your Twitter accounts, and learn a lot from you by your comments that you make within, perhaps this Facebook group, this, another group. And it's easy to have someone who's, a good psychologist on board, and they can really get into your mindset based on what you're actually saying online. So I think to a degree we're all watched, whether it's landlines, iPhones, laptops, other devices.
I don't mean to cut you off, but it seems like people are buying into this type of propaganda weapon because this surveillance state, this Big Brother. Why I say that is because people will get offended if you don't like a comment on Facebook or like a post on Facebook or if somebody tags you in something and you didn't see it or reply. People get offended.
Yeah, they do.
And this is part of the surveillance state. Yeah. This is one small step, but it's still part of the surveillance.
You do. I mean, you find that, so I do a post or something like this, and I don't sit around thinking, well, why hasn't John Smith or Bill Jones liked the post?
Why isn't Mike Blocker?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, my view is that if people like it, that's fine. I'm not going to lose sleep. But there are people who are like, I've actually a couple of times people have said to me, did you not like that article because you didn't click on like? And I said, well, give me a chance. I haven't read the thing yet, But that's how people get. And I think one of the reasons why, from a disturbing perspective, people get sucked into all this because the technology itself is really cool. Something like Alexa or an iPhone. 20 years ago, we'd have said that's just sci-fi. Or you could ask, your iPhone, how many gas stations are there on the journey we're going on now? And it'll answer you. People say that's like 200 years away, but it isn't. It's here right now. So the technology sort of hypnotizes people because it is cool. I have to admit it's cool. But my concern is how that cool technology can be turned against us. I don't have any problem with people using, iPhones and Facebook or anything, because I use them all the time. But the concern is when somebody tries to use it for a malicious purpose, for a sinister purpose. And then the big question is, well, how do we stop that from happening when we're so tied into the technology already? It's like a catch-22. We don't want to have people hack into our equipment, but on the other hand, we're so now tied to where we must have this equipment, So it's almost, where do we go with it?
How did all this technology, like over the past 100 years, how did this, and a lot of this technology, the elites, cabal, whatever name you want to put on these figureheads, they are definitely using this technology, I believe, for sinister purposes. It's hard to put a finger on who, when, the thing is. But like, what do you think? Where do they get this technology? Because it seems like we had a surge of technology over the past 100 years. Was it from crashed UFOs? Was it the real and full society? Did they tap into something? Like, what is going on?
Well, the UFO angle's interesting. I'm not sure to what extent alien technology would have bearing on creating an iPhone. I think a lot of it has just come down to that the more and more we advance technology-wise, the more and more we get an understanding of how we can advance it. So it kind of just spirals. The more you look into it, the more research you do into this technology, the greater that technology then becomes. But I think, we are now sort of in an almost sort of dangerous, surreal territory when you've got things like, I actually read an article just a few days ago where this guy was projecting that perhaps 20, 30 years from now, most young kids, and maybe even the adult population will spend sort of 40–50% of their time in sort of like alternative reality kind of situation.
Yeah, it's already here.
Yeah. When you just, you put your goggles on and it's so realistic, 10 times better than today, so to speak, and you interact, you can become a secret, James Bond or whatever, and for 2 weeks, that kind of thing.
I could be Nick Redfern and write about 5 books a year.
Exactly. But, I think this whole angle, of virtual reality, that could really take over people's lives, And of course, when you're so tied into these technologies, you're not really seeing what's going on in the real world.
No.
And that's one of the big problems, is that, if you look at all the things that are going on today, like surveillance and, hacking of phones and just monitoring you through your laptop, all of this kind of thing, one of the big problems is that the vast majority of the population aren't complaining about it. They just get on with their lives. Yeah. Now, if you look back at, say, for example, Watergate in the 1970s, which brought down President Nixon, well, that happened because of the whole issue of the bugging of the Democratic Party offices. Now, that was just bugging the offices, and it brought down the president. And yet today, potentially everybody's being watched, but nobody's being brought down, And part of it is because people would rather just see how many likes they've got on Facebook than actually look into what might be going on behind the scenes, in respect of something like a New World Order. So one of the big ironies is that a lot of this is going ahead and being allowed to go ahead because a lot of people just don't care. And that's like a disturbing thing. It's like, well, what's going to be next? Are they going to sort of dictate which books you can read? You know, one of the ways in which I could see the future kind of developing would be mirrored in Ray Bradbury's novel Fahrenheit 451, which has just been released as a new TV movie. And for people who don't know, Fahrenheit 451, the title comes from the fact that that's the temperature at which paper burns. And in the novel and in the movie, which is set, a few decades from now, there's been a civil war in the US, and to basically put everybody under control, books are banned and burned. And the goal is that by, the next decade or the decade after that, every book that ever existed will have been burned out of existence. And so it's basically a grim, dark story of how people can be controlled, manipulated, how history can be wiped out and people know nothing about it and they don't care. And in the movie as well, they're sort of drugged. They're given, encouraged to take all these different drugs every day, and people can't remember, their childhood because their minds are so clouded. Now, fortunately, in the movie and in the novel, it has a good ending. It's a positive ending. It's not like a bleak ending. So that, that's a good thing. But I always say to people, when they complain about the way the world's going, I often say, well, what are you doing about it? Nothing. So, it's, what do you do? If you think about it, all of this surveillance that's going on, it hasn't occurred because we've got like jackbooted people kicking your front door down and demanding and ordering you. That hasn't happened. What's happening is just like a slow but unstoppable increase bit by bit of surveillance and erosion of liberties, and you don't realize it's happening until you look back, say 10 years, at how things were then and how they are now, and then you realize how different it's become.
I can tell you what's already different now, Nick, is last night at the baseball game, they had these law enforcement agencies, law enforcement officers, whatever. They looked like they were ready for combat. They had, I was military police. I know that this is far. You know, like this is really out there stuff. It's all because of 9/11, and they use 9/11 as a tool to push forward their agendas and their ideologies. And now, 17 years later, there's a law enforcement guy, several of them, at the game last night outside the stadium with M16s. They had silencers on them, and these guys are all blacked out. They had, I'm talking about gear everywhere. They had their sidearm. They had a taser. I'm talking about these guys were ready for combat, and they even had their silencers on. Like this, they're very intimidating. And before 9/11, you would never see that.
Well, I think one of the interesting things as well is that, you know, kids who are born post 9/11 are living in a world where completely different to the one we grew up as kids. And so for them, and again, this is kind of the disturbing angle, they've never known any difference. So, you know, technology drives their lives. And in some respects, it almost seems they just expect, you know, things like surveillance and to live, you know, in that way. It's normal. Yeah, and when it becomes the normal thing, then, you know, it's like, well, now what's going to happen? That's kind of like the scenario in Fahrenheit 451, that the further that the oppression goes and people, you know, grow old and eventually die, and then the next generation comes along, and then the next, they actually say, you know, by the time your grandchildren are born, they won't even know what a book is or what it means. And so, you know, they're sort of working to, you know, when the next generation is gone, and then the one after that's gone, then there really is no generation that has any memory of what the world used to be like. That's basically how the story plays out.
Now, let's go back a little bit to the black budget money that we was talking about. You also talk about everything in this book, the New World Order book. But towards the end, I want to kind of tie in possibly maybe an alien scenario. And we talked pre-recording of what maybe they may use in the future, and you write about that also. But DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Now, is DARPA part of this black budget? Is some of this black budget money being funneled to them, you think?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say who, you know, what's being funded to who.
What is their agenda in this whole game, you think?
Well, I mean, one of the areas that they've been looking into in the last few years, actually two areas. One is sort of the whole issue of chips and implants. They've been doing a lot of research into that. And also sort of, you know, mind-based technology, you know, sort of what are known as non-lethal weapons, which can sort of, you know, affect the human mind, like low-frequency weapons, that kind of thing, which can destabilize a person, you know, very, very easily, like nausea and vertigo, and, you know, where you're not able to operate. One of the things I would stress, which I sort of touched on earlier, is that I think a lot of this that's going on, as I said, it isn't actually being done by or with the order of a government. It's done by, you know, by manipulators who are in the background, who are encouraging and pushing agencies to do this and to do that, which they wouldn't normally do. So I think that's one of the big differences I have with a lot of conspiracy theories. I don't think, you know, the US government's bad and they're doing A, B, C. What I think, you know, the vast majority of people in government, the military, etc., intelligence community, they're all good people just looking out for everybody's safety, which they should do. But you have some of these powerful figures that integrate themselves in and very easily manipulate the mindset of some of the, you know, the people in the agencies, and I think that's what we have to look out for. And certainly, you know, when we're looking at these advanced technologies, you know, and all these talks about microchips. I mean, you may know this as well yourself, being with the military, that, you know, there've been, over the last couple of years, the military started doing a lot of research into sort of implanting chips in troops, and also, you know, sort of even like cyborg technology, you know, integrated into the troops as well. You know, sort of early versions of like RoboCop or something like that. And
they talked about it also, that they said the military that you know right now, this was several years ago when I was in, the military you know right now is going to be completely different 20, 30 years down the road. And they said, we're going to start integrating with technology. We're going to start integrating with robots. You can start having robots do more and more. Basically what they're saying is AI. They're going to start integrating more. That's what they're working on. A lot of these, possibly DARPA, a lot of these other big groups is artificial intelligence to, that'd be a scary future, Nick, where you actually have a conscious robot that is fighting wars or killing people. That's a very scary future to think about.
Well, it is. But what I sort of going back to what I said earlier is that it's scary from our perspective, but for the people 30 years from now, they may just see our views as quaint and old-fashioned. It's kind of like if we time traveled to 50 years from now, it might be so stressful for us, that world. In the same way that if somebody was time traveled from 100 years ago to now, they just probably wouldn't be able to stand the speed of life, and technology. But for the people of the era, it's totally normal for them. And I think that's one of the worrying angles, that not so much, can we change people, can we implant them, can we integrate them with AI? The question shouldn't be, can we do it, but, should we actually do it? There's nothing wrong with actually retaining what makes us human. And if you start going down that path of integrating technology and chips, and designer babies and that kind of thing, what colour hair do you want your baby to have, how tall do you want him to be, that kind of thing. That gets into like really disturbing areas. So there's so much at stake here, in terms of people's freedoms, ensuring that we have privacy, and just making sure that we're not placed in sort of almost like a slave-like situation.
Do you think, kind of back to what we were talking about earlier in the very beginning, do you think a lot of these players are part of these secret societies, and such as Skull and Bones? Because if you're part of the right group, you get a ticket straight to the top.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at throughout history, when you've had secret societies, and some that are sort of semi-secret. You look at the Illuminati, Bohemian Grove, Skull and Bones. All of these organisations have within their ranks, and have had in their ranks, a lot of people in government, in military, in the intelligence communities. And it does very much become like a secret fraternity. And, when you integrate that with a lot of the people in those organisations and the societies as well, are sort of, people from the banking communities, old money, old powerful families. You can trace a lineage going back centuries and centuries, which leads further to, the earlier secret societies and cabals and that kind of thing. You put all that together and you can easily see how you can have people sort of running the world, but with outside of government, but using government as sort of as the means to get this or that done.
And my grandfather, he's very high up in the Scottish Freemasonry, the Scottish Rite, and he's asked me before, because I asked a lot of questions, and he knew I was interested in, I guess, knowledge, but it's not necessarily the seeker of knowledge that maybe they are seeking. But he said he's always asked me. He's almost 80 now, and he's very high up, and he keeps asking me, so do you want to join? And he's told me before that he has traced my mother's side, the Worley side, English, all the way back to the times of Jesus.
Wow.
And that's one of the things that made him so high up, because it was be able to trace his lineage, my mother's side's lineage. And my thing is, like, why is that so significant? You know, and I know they're just they're on the very bottom of the pyramid. I understand that. But it is departmentalized, Nick, and I think all these players, people can't see the bigger picture because it is so departmentalized. And they call people like me and you that talk about these things, oh, you're nuts, you're a lunatic, whatever. We don't have these things going on. But once you start connecting the dots, there's a very deep, dark, sinister agenda going on behind the scenes, you know.
Yeah.
So you talk about the Illuminati and the New World Order also. Now, define what you think. What is the Illuminati, and how does it tie in with the New World Order?
Well, I mean, that's a good question, because, I mean, you know, on the one hand, you have people who say the Illuminati was just this centuries-old organization, like a fraternity of people that got together and had power and influence, but they're long gone. And then at the other end of the scale, you have people who take the view that the Illuminati is some sort of all-powerful, you know, world-manipulating organization with, you know, major figures in politics, etc., all secretly involved. And I think it's kind of somewhere in between. And, you know, the likelihood that the term Illuminati is actually used very much today, you know, is not that, you know, for these people is probably hardly ever, you know, but I think the problem with trying to figure out the extent of the Illuminati is that it's become so almost legendary. And when something becomes legendary, then all sort of bets are off in terms of what's going on. It becomes this almost like a mystical thing. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly how it becomes. And so I think, for me, I think a lot of this started with the Illuminati, but I think today it's the term Illuminati for these people is more symbolic than it is, you know, an active group. What I think is that there have been offshoots and new developments, and they don't necessarily consider themselves today as the Illuminati. They're sort of, you know, the fourth, fifth generation of people that were brought up in the organization or the society. And then what's happened from there is that people have picked up on their work, on their ideology, and then developed it into, you know, how people can be controlled and manipulated today. So I think it was the springboard for what we're seeing now. But in terms of its name, I think it is pretty much symbolic more than anything else.
Do you think that some of these secret groups, these secret societies or what have you, created the Georgia Guidestones that talk about, you talk about overpopulation in the book and depopulation and chemtrails, all kinds, many things. Do you think that they were, what do you think they were hinting at? Do you think that was just a joke, or is there really something really going on, because they talk about limiting the Earth's population to, is it 500 million?
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, if it's a joke, it's a pretty bad taste joke, you know. And just the fact that people, you know, in power, people in places of influence are talking about it or thinking about it, that's disturbing enough. Now, it's one thing to have a population that's smaller and where there'll be more food and, you know, cost more money to go around for everybody. That's one thing. But the other big issue, of course, is, well, you know, these people have actively got plans to achieve it. You know, if you're, like now, we have a population around about 7 billion, I think it is. If you want to decrease it down to, say, just 2 billion, then, well, what are you going to do with those 5 billion people? Wipe them out? You know, I mean, you're talking about sort of, if these stories and rumours are true, you know, you're talking about widespread murder on a worldwide scale. You know, it's not a case of, you know, sort of cutting the herd down, culling the herd, you know, using terms that don't sound like murder. But, you know, I mean, if you think about it, you cannot get rid of people, and you should not get rid of people who are here.
We create their technology and begin with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you know, everybody who's on the planet has a right to be here. Nobody should be dictating who's going to be wiped out and who isn't, because if there is any truth to this, you know that the ones who are going to survive are going to be the global elite, you know, and people who can, from their perspective, offer something towards it, you know. So I think any discussion of lowering the human population is so disturbing that everybody should be aware of it, and everybody should take notice of all these rumours of, you know, oh yeah, we need to lower the population by X number of million people. Well, as I said, I mean, if somebody says that theoretically and they don't take it any further, well, that's a relief, you know. If they do decide to take it further, you know, it's no better than what the Nazis were doing, you know, putting people into concentration camps. I mean,
eugenics.
Yeah, it's a modern day equivalent of that. If it happens, it would be a modern day equivalent of Hitler and genocide and just large scale wiping out the population, which, you know, I mean, God forbid that doesn't happen.
Are they working on it right now through possibly maybe chemtrails?
Well, I mean,
what's that angle right there?
Well, I mean, it kind of depends who you ask. And that's, you know, that ties in with a lot of these stories about depopulation. You know, people have said, well, that it's a government document that talks about how we need to lower populations, etc. But it's a theoretical document, some people have said. And it's kind of like with chemtrails. I mean, for people who don't know, there probably aren't that many. But, you know, you have the chemtrail scenario is that there are aircraft flying through the skies, essentially releasing dangerous toxins which could, you know, affect us significantly, lower lifespans, which would, you know, over time cut the population down. Then, of course, on the other side of the coin, you have people who say, oh, well, this is just a case of conspiracy theorists just looking at aircraft and seeing contrails rather than chemtrails.
Some say it's actually to block it's part of a global geoengineering plot to block maybe UV rays from getting in and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of theories from malevolent to benevolent. And, you know, that's, in one sense, it makes the whole subject very interesting because there's lots of different theories, but then it's also confusing by the fact that there's so many different theories as to what could be going on. You know, I've read a number of interesting papers on chemtrails, which, you know, think, wow, you know, this is really mysterious and sinister, you know, disturbing. And then you read another paper where somebody puts their view that it's just too much, people with too much time looking at too many aircraft, you know. So I've always been in kind of on the fence when it comes to the whole chemtrail thing, but I do think it's important that we talk about it. You know, it's not something that we should you know, dismiss. We need to sort of, you know, just try and nail it down, so to speak.
Do you think we are overpopulated? I've heard Jim Marrs state, the late Jim Marrs, that you could fit the entire world's population, or before I get into that, really it's just this, he believed it was just a scam to create more New World Order, to push forward more towards their agendas, what they want, what they're going towards, their ideologies and everything else. But he stated, Jim Marrs, on several interviews, that you could fit the entire Earth's population into the state of Texas in, I want to say, a lot. Everybody could have their own lot in the state of Texas. It's not an overpopulation thing, I think, is what he stated. It's I forgot how he stated it, but just tell me your thoughts on that. What do you think about overpopulation?
Well, I mean, what we know for sure is that the population is constantly increasing. I mean, there's no doubt about that. You can look throughout history, and it is going up and up. And at the same time, we're seeing massive destruction of rainforests. Animals, species are becoming extinct on a massive scale that's, is just increasing. And we're not just talking about, a little beetle or a worm or a spider, in the jungles of South America. We're talking about animals that have been around longer than us, or as long as us. And, you hear stories now about, giraffes potentially going extinct, this particular tiger, that kind of thing. And it's like, well, where's it going to end? Obviously, population control is a very dangerous path to go down, because it's like, where's it going to end? I don't believe anybody should be embarking at all in a program of population control, because it's like smart technology. It'll inevitably end up as being abused, and people who have their agendas will, or could at least, manipulate this whole idea of population control. So I don't think population control is a path that anyone should go down. But do I think we're going to be faced with challenges in the future because there are more and more people? Yeah, I do. But the big, the conflict is, well, how do you do something about it? And I don't know. That's not a get out answer. I just don't know.
So many factors at play.
Yeah, because if you are someone who actively wants to lower the world's population, then the person who's going to do this, or the group, like I said, are essentially committing murder. And how is it their right to say who can have a kid and who can't have a kid? That I sure as hell know that they would make sure if they wanted children, they would have them. But, oh no, you people can't.
I don't think these people are eating GMOs also. These figureheads, the cabal. That's what some would say. I don't. Well, I think they have a better diet. They know what's good for them.
Well, I mean, food.
I don't mean to cut you off, but look at the Queen. She looks the same now. She looks the same now at 90-something years old as whenever I was a little kid growing up. Joseph Farrell said the same thing. He said when he was, and he's older than I am, he said when he was a kid in the 60s or 70s, she looks the same. What's going on here? do they have prolonged life technology? What's going on?
Well, you mentioned food. That's a good angle, because if you look at it, the amount of people today compared to, say, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, who had diabetes. Today it's like a plague almost. When I say plague, I mean in terms of the scale and size of it. It's like a massive percentage now of the population. And, you mix in diabetes with obesity, lack of physical activity, and I could easily see a point in the near future where, now everybody's living to sort of 85, 86, something like that. It's in the 80s now. But with today's kids, who are, say, 4 or 5, grown up in a world where kids don't go playing out on their bikes, etc., and falling off and cutting your arms. And, when we were kids, you sort of, playing, soldiers or whatever, and running around town and falling off your bike. And
you got cut, started bleeding. That was cool.
Well, that's what happens when you fall off your bike. But I can imagine how today's kids, just sat at home in the bed, texting their friends instead of playing with their friends, and hardly any physical activity, just tied to smart technology, the massive changes in diet, obesity, diabetes. I could see a point in the next few years. People think, technology is going to give us extended lifespans, but I could see how this sort of lethargic life dominated by food could actually, I could see the point coming where we reach a peak of, say, 85, and then it starts to drop. I mean, today's kids of 5 or 6, it's difficult to know. But, you know, if you could project how their health's going to be when they're 70, you know, we could have, like, entire populations of people who just can barely walk, you know, a quarter of a mile, and they're screwed, you know.
Maybe that's what they want, these players, because maybe that's part of the television, the programming, the conscious programming, the propaganda tools, the surveillance state, the food, the obesity. Maybe this is actually to weaken the population and to mind control the population to where it's hard for us to fight back physically and mentally.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, literally for a lot of people it would be difficult because, I mean, no disrespect, but, you know, if your health's not good and more people get more and more sick and more reliant on drugs, well, then you do have a population, really, that is very different to 30 years ago. I mean, when I was a kid, you know, sort of 8 or 9, you know, me and my friends, after you get back home, do your homework, then we'd be on our bikes riding around town. You know, Mum and Dad would say, well, just make sure you're back by the time the moon's up, you know. Mm-hmm. And today, you know, if a parent did that, they'd be busted by the cops or something, you know, as bad parents. And really, in a lot, okay, yeah, we live in a violent world, but there are still plenty of places where kids could ride their bikes around town quite safely, but we're told, you know, you let your kid go out after 6 o'clock at night on their bikes, they're going to be killed, you know, they're going to be murdered, they're going to be kidnapped or whatever.
In any state.
Yeah, and people buy into it, and I get it that, like I said, the world is a more violent place, but you know, there's also got to be a degree of common sense that you know, we're not living completely like a Mad Max world kind of thing, you know. But people buy into it. People, you know, the commercials on TV. I kind of draw a parallel with what we talked about earlier in terms of smart technology being abused. And I think the same thing can happen when it comes to issues like medication. It almost seems today that it's sort of cool to tell people, oh, I'm on this medication for this, you know, and I feel much better. And if people have genuine conditions, that's fine. But when you have, you know, kids sort of abusing mind-altering medication just to get a high, you know, and they get hooked on it, and they
Adderall, Ritalin.
Yeah, exactly. Then you have this situation of a potentially, if it continues to increase and it becomes like an epidemic, it's almost like a dumbed down population where you're just numb, sitting on the couch feeling really mellowed out, but to the point where you cannot really function properly. And
you're a
I think
zombie pretty much.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, I see this developing more and more with TV commercials, you know, take this, take that. I mean, I don't take any kind of medication for any kind of condition. And for me, you know, if the day goes bad, I don't pop a pill. I deal with the day, you know, and you do what you've got to do to put things right. You know, you can either curl up in a ball in the corner of the room crying, or you can do what I do, which is make whatever you've got to put right to get the day right, you do it.
Oh, yeah.
Or you just pop a bunch of pills to blitz yourself out so you don't have to deal with it. And though that approach of just popping pills is the easiest answer, but it's the wrong answer. And again, with like surveillance, I can see how in the future the majority might be on mood-altering medication because, number one, you know, they feel left out almost, that they're the ones, you know, they feel that we could actually get to that point where the people who aren't on medication are seen as the weirdos. Mm-hmm. As strange as that might sound, I could see that happening. But I could also see populations just, self-medicated every day because you're told you need it because the world's so bad,
And man, you talk about many fascinating topics within this book, many fascinating topics. And so Jim Morris talked about the Fourth Reich also.
Mm-hmm.
And give me your angle of what the Fourth Reich is. And so do we really have these modern day Nazis within our government, or within maybe secret groups that are possibly pulling the strings behind the scenes?
I don't think we have literal Nazis sort of, infiltrating government. What I do think, is that we're sort of sliding again into this angle that we don't see it happening until we see that it's there, and that it's sort of like the militarization of the police and the angle of oppression. There's no, oppressive situations are sort of developing more and more, and unfortunately you do see a lot of people now who are outright racist. You do. It's like a growing epidemic, and my view is that I don't have an issue with any race or any culture, providing you're not hurting anybody else. But again, we're seeing almost like this boiling over situation of, well, that person's got dark skin, that person's got a beard. Where are they from? Why are they here? That kind of thing. And that's sort of like a disturbing development. I mean, one of the things, people forget about, things like Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was democratically elected. He wasn't, it wasn't like a civil war and his side managed to win. He was democratically elected, and that's a disturbing situation, where if anything like that ever was paralleled, in today's world, in the Western world, it would be a cause for just massive disaster, because you might not even, people could be so controlled that we would never get back to a regular kind of life. So I think, there is a danger that kind of situation happening, particularly if you keep amping up, these people are our enemies, those people are our enemies. And then, what's it going to be next? Everybody who isn't white is the enemy. Do you see what I mean?
They could be pushing for this civil war or race war or both. I feel like, because what is Fox News, CNN, they're always trying to anger people, hype people up, rile people up.
Yeah, and I think if we, if anything ever happened where it was like a real fascist type organisation became the norm in terms of the government, I mean, it would be disaster. It'd be chaos. You would have the crazy people who support it, and you would have the people who are trying to get back to normal. And I could see how there would then be a clash. You could have sort of a head-on civil war situation.
So here's a very interesting one to me. Project for the New American Century. This kind of leads into the next part, I guess. Now, explain a little bit to the audience what Project for the New American Century is, and I guess maybe your opinions of what exactly are they trying to say here.
Well, yeah, this was sort of like a think tank type paper, looking and projecting to how things would be in the next, or should be in the next 30 or 40 years, in terms of almost kind of like creating a benevolent United Nations, but on a far bigger scale, where I guess almost like the borders between countries and nations would begin slowly to be blurred. Now, on the one hand, more integration and more connections with other nations, etc., is a good thing, because I think one of the problems today is that people only have this small, distorted image of what a lot of countries around the world are like. So I think something that would bring us more and more together could create like a greater sense of harmony if you actually get to know people from other countries and learn about their culture, rather than just us being isolated here or isolated there, like the world is now. But again, could it be used against us, where slowly, yes, the borders kind of start to disappear, and wouldn't it be a good idea if we all had one kind of currency? And we mentioned Fahrenheit 451 in the movie. Over time, they start to encourage everybody to try and all speak one language, and by the time of the movie that it's set, it's down to like 60 languages in the world are now left, versus like several hundred that were in existence 50 years earlier. So they're trying to get it down to one language, which is obviously, you can tell that they want everyone to speak English, which again is a dangerous path, because, you know, every country should have its own culture and not be dictated to by others. So again, you know, this idea of projecting how we could have a better world if we all sort of integrate and work together.
We're going to, the last little segment, we talked a little bit more about Big Brother surveillance and the control grid just a little bit. And now we're going to try to tie in the possibly an alien angle, an alien agenda, and is the government working with possibly ET maybe? So Reagan Reagan has been theorized to been a UFO believer, you know, because he once had the statement or the quote, "What would life be like if here on Earth?" I'm paraphrasing. You know, if we were all threatened against an alien threat, or we're all faced an alien threat, if something like that. Yeah. And you also write Reagan's view of a world united by UFOs. Elaborate a little bit on that in his speech, possibly, too.
Well, yeah, this is interesting because Reagan, when he was president, mentioned the whole UFO/alien angle on several occasions. It wasn't just one lecture. He mentioned, I think, on 4 or 5 altogether. And basically, he spoke about how, from his perspective, he wondered what the situation would be if the entire human race was faced with a threat from outer space. And he felt that it would be the one defining thing which would unite the entire human race under one umbrella, so to speak. And he specifically talked about like a hostile alien threat, not just alien visits or, you know, a large-scale sudden appearance of UFOs in the sky, specifically talking about a dangerous threat and how we would unite and fight against it. And some conspiracy researchers have seen this as being that Reagan, as president, was briefed and knew about the alien presence and was briefed on the history of it, etc., etc. Other researchers take the view that Reagan was either talking about or warning the people of the idea that somebody might fake an alien invasion as a means to take control, to bring forth things like martial law and curfews in the name of national security. So we're looking at 2 different things that, or they could be interrelated, one being a real alien threat and the other one being a fabricated alien threat. And what's interesting, you can read Reagan's statements and actually take it either way. Was he warning us that there was going to be a threat, a real threat, or was he warning of us of a fake threat? Or was he just trying to gauge everybody's response? But what's interesting is that more than 30 years after he made these statements, people are still talking about them. So it has left an impact on people's minds. There's no doubt about that.
It definitely has. And so I think this threat is possibly, do you think that he was familiar with types of technology that they were facing, or maybe will be facing in the future, such as Project Bluebeam, and because the hologram, just the image of a hologram is, they're doing concerts now, Nick, where they're projecting Michael Jackson or whoever, Tupac, you know, rapping and singing on stage, and it looks, it's eerie, very eerie, and could they use this type of technology to create a second coming or an alien invasion that could possibly make them create martial law and be one staple into the New World Order plan?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at the way the technology is going now, and I always tell people that, you know, whatever's in the public domain, you can guarantee that there's something hidden that is way ahead, and we won't know about it for another 10 or 15 years. So whatever holographic technology we have today, somebody in the technological world is going to have access to something that's far in advance of our hologram technology. And there's no doubt that, you know, in terms of utilizing holograms, that is far easier than having to literally construct a flying saucer type craft, you know, 30 or 40 of them, have a fleet and have to build them and hope they don't get shot down, and then somebody finds out they're actually filled with human people rather than aliens. You know, if you can project imagery, that's going to save a lot of time, effort, etc. in creating these things, if it's just an image. So, you know, holograph technology for the future at least could be a perfect way to control us. We'll wake up one particular morning and across every city on the entire planet, there's 4 or 5 huge UFOs just hovering there, but they're not real. And the same thing if it wasn't aliens, but it was, you know, deities, gods from all multiple different religions and cultures around the world. Different countries and cultures get to see their gods and so on. And, you know, this ties in with something that's known as Project Bluebeam. And it goes back to the mid-1990s and a Canadian journalist named Serge Monast, who claimed to have basically uncovered the sort of the bare bones of this operation that's known as Project Bluebeam. The idea being something very much like what we've just discussed, using holograms to create images in the sky. Now he was looking at the idea of, you know, images of gods and deities all around the world, and how this would sort of integrate with the whole story of the Antichrist, and out of all these religions which would crumble, then the Antichrist would be the sort of the new leader of the world, so to speak. But it would all be fabricated. There would be no real second coming of anything or first coming of anything. It would just purely be like a cold-hearted, manipulative set of images in the sky projected using technology. And, you know, then the idea of placing the world under sort of an iron-fisted old-time religion situation, where we would all be sort of in shackles, if you like, almost, but due to this technology. Now, people say, well, there's no way something like that could be carried out. A lot of people don't realise that on a smaller and more primitive stage, it was actually, an attempt was made in the early 1960s to do something very similar. And it basically involved a guy named Major Edward Lansdale, who was in the US military, and he was an expert in things like psychological warfare, disinformation. And he came up with this strange plan, which didn't work, but it was very much like Project Bluebeam. And his idea was to try and overthrow Fidel Castro's regime in Cuba, and this is in the early 60s, and do so in a very odd way. Not by invading the island, but by fabricating a second coming of Jesus. And the plan was to have these aircraft that would fly through the clouds of Cuba with these very powerful microphones and loudspeakers, essentially pretending to be the voice of God, saying, denounce Fidel Castro and, embrace, the United States and so on. And the other plan was to use sort of old type projector beams and project pictures of God and Jesus on the clouds over Cuba. Now, in one sense, had it all been possible to make it come to fruition, it could have worked, who knows. But the problem was there were so many factors that were unpredictable. There had to be clouds, the aircraft had to be in clouds that were thick enough to where no one would see the aircraft, they would just hear this booming voice. And the program was actually shut down because it was seen as being too unwieldy and too unfeasible. But the plan, in black and white, when you nail it down, was to use fabricated images and the voice of God and Jesus as a means to overthrow the government of Cuba. That sounds very much like an early version of somebody thinking of something along the lines of Bluebeam. But back in 62, 61, the technology was not there. And when they did dry runs of it, so to speak, they just realized there was no way they could make sure the clouds were there. They couldn't guarantee that people would not realize it was a ruse, etc. So they gave up on it.
Could they use this technology? I'm sorry to interrupt, Nick. Could they use this technology, this hologram, Bluebeam type of technology, alongside actual physical technology such as the black triangles? Because the one seen over Phoenix was huge.
Yeah.
They may use their own technology, maybe along with holograms.
Yeah. I don't think you could completely rely on holograms. One of the reasons being that a hologram is a hologram. There's no actual solidity to it. So, in other words, let's say that one of these holograms is situated right over Dallas right now. Well, you can have some people in the military who are not going to be cleared to what Project Bluebeam is. So their planes might be sent up to shoot them down. They fire a missile at a hologram and they see it goes right through it. They're going to see this is something else is going on. This is not a physical craft. Then the program could fall apart. So I think if anything like that ever happened, something like a Bluebeam, it would be a combination of holograms and real advanced technology made to look like alien technology, but actually wasn't. I mean, we hear these stories coming out of Area 51 of bizarre aircraft being test flown. I mean, if you look at the story of Bob Lazar, Bob Lazar back in the 80s came forward claiming to have worked on alien technology at Area 51. A lot of researchers dismiss him, but I don't. I think he was brought into something, and I think it was some sort of like a psychological operation to have him convinced he was working with alien technology, which he may have been, but there's also the angle that he was led to believe it was alien and to create this legend of alien technology at Area 51. Well, if you want to convince people you've got alien technology and it works, but it's actually your own technology, and then you suddenly unleash it on the world, people are going to say, well, this is alien, because we know that it's all stored at Area 51. But maybe a lot of this technology would not be alien. It really could be we've got the technology today to mirror UFOs. And I mean, even if I was to see something like a 200-foot diameter UFO flying over Dallas and, left and right-hand turns, etc., at 500 miles an hour, I think there's no way we could do that. And so you're all already brought into the idea that it's aliens. And of course, if they never land and nothing ever gets out of them, you would never know they're actually being piloted by people. So.
What exactly, to elaborate a little bit more on Area 51, what exactly do you think is going on there?
Well, the problem is, I think there have been so many mind games going on at Area 51 where now there could be legitimate alien technology stored there. Equally, there could be a vast array of highly, highly advanced military technology designed to mirror what we would say is a UFO or a flying saucer. And I think that these mind games have extended to where I think some of these people who come across as whistleblowers telling what they saw at Area 51, I saw the alien bodies, I saw crashed UFOs. Mm. I sometimes think some of them aren't whistleblowers. I think they're part of a program where it looks like they're sort of like Edward Snowden blowing the whistle, when actually they're part of the plan to encourage people to believe there really is alien technology at Area 51, when there might not be. Or it could be a bit of both. So I think the big problem is there have been a lot of disinformation, mind games, psychological warfare, all coming out of Area 51. So we don't know what the full picture is. But I think the end game could be to use advanced technology, which could be a combination of alien and human, or one or the other, but to use it in a way in which a ruse, a diversion, could be used to make us think it's an alien invasion when it actually isn't.
Very well said, Nick. And we're kind of winding up this conversation for this time. But do you think that ETs are working alongside with the government or the cabal? Mm-hmm. Because we've all heard of Project Serpo and Eisenhower and Truman meeting with aliens. Tell me your thoughts on that. Are groups within our government, the rogue groups, the cabal, whatever you want to call them, are they working alongside these ETs? Yeah.
It's an interesting angle, the idea of government agencies working alongside alien entities or multidimensional entities, whatever you want to call them, I think there's some interesting stories out there, but there's no doubt this is one of the most controversial aspects of the whole UFO phenomenon. But what I find intriguing is that these stories are sort of long-lasting, and you can find them, here, there, and everywhere. For example, there are rumours that the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind was based upon these rumours of astronauts from here being taken to an alien world and aliens coming here, and this sort of exchange of technology. There are rumours about President Eisenhower, to some degree at least, having some initiating a connection between us and them, so to speak. Then you have the controversial Project Serpo program and documents which tell a similar story. Again, like with Area 51, I'm not sure if that's disinformation to make it seem like we know more about them than we actually do. Or maybe somebody, the truth really is stranger than fiction. Again, I'm not sort of fence-sitting, I'm just in two minds because I just don't think we have enough data to say one way or another. We have a lot of stories and interesting accounts. We need to go to that next step of trying to prove it, Exactly. But there's no doubt, you get stories coming out of like Area 51, like the tall whites, these aliens, these strange-looking sort of 10-foot tall, pale aliens that are supposedly there, and there's no doubt the stories are out there.
What about Dulce?
Well,
give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, the Dulce story is an interesting one because you have these rumours of this sort of vast underground alien base, if you like, buried deep within what's known as the Archuleta Mesa in this little town of Dulce in northern New Mexico. The interesting thing about the Dulce story, and for people who don't know, Dulce is a small town in northern New Mexico, and for several decades there have been rumours that within the Archuleta Mesa, which is this gigantic mesa that overlooks the town, there's this ancient alien base, so to speak, with multiple levels, and the aliens have supposedly been there for whoever knows how long. And all sorts of rumours have circulated about bizarre experiments undertaken on people who are held there as prisoners. And the story goes on that supposedly the US government has lost control or never had control of it and is fearful of going back in. It's now sort of like a no-go area. Now, a lot of researchers say, well, this is just not possible. This is just, paranoia run wild. But what's interesting is that there actually has been a lot of genuine weird stuff at Dulce. For example, if you go to the FBI's website, the Vault, click on the Unexplained Phenomenon section and click on the Animal Mutilation section, and you can download in PDF form all the FBI's files on cattle mutilations from the 70s. Most of those reports all come from the Dulce area, and they talk about animals drained of blood, with skin removed, with evidence of what looks like laser-type technology. Black helicopters are mentioned in the FBI's own files.
Jim Keith did phenomenal research on
that
too.
Yeah, he did, yeah. And so in other words, we know that there's been a genuine history of cattle mutilations directly in the Dulce area, which were of deep interest to the FBI, who've now declassified their files. But also, you can go back to the 1960s. In 1967, the Atomic Energy Commission had this program called Project Gas Buggy. And the idea was to try and, it was like an energy-based program, to try and get natural gas out of the deep underground, and then we could use it as fuel. Well, how are you going to get all that fuel? The idea was to detonate a small atomic device which would allow them to access the natural gas, which is buried, massively deep down. And they actually did it. They exploded a small atomic device to try and access the natural gas deposits, so to speak. And what's interesting today is that the area where the detonation went ahead, there are actually signs there today warning people that it's against the law to dig underground in that part of Dulce. So on the one hand, you have the idea of this detonation as a means to try and, to get the natural gas. Other researchers think that that was a cover story, and the detonation of the atomic bomb was to try and destroy at least part of the Dulce facility.
Oh.
And they point out quite truthfully that there are signs there that do say it is illegal to dig in this area underground.
I haven't heard of that angle yet.
Oh yeah, a lot of people don't know that. If you look up Project Gas Buggy and New Mexico, gas buggy is all one word, you'll find the story of how the Atomic Energy Commission had this plan to open up the natural gas supplies and do it by detonating, a very powerful bomb underground. So again, you have this underground factor in Dulce, but in relation to going back to the 1960s. So regardless of whether people buy into the Dulce underground base or not, the fact is that has been a lot of weird stuff going on there with the cattle mutes in the 70s, with the Atomic Energy Commission in the 60s. So who knows? Black helicopters, all sorts of weird stuff, strange lights in the sky.
Roswell isn't
not too far away,
too far away.
Yeah, I mean, one of the weird things is I've got some reports of black helicopters in and around Dulce where people said they saw these black helicopters like morph into balls of light, as if the helicopters were almost like a hologram, and we weren't seeing what they really were. They were some sort of drone, or some people suggest they're like alien craft which can sort of camouflage themselves as helicopters, which is like really controversial. But there's actually not a shortage of reports who've seen these black helicopters, and they've literally sort of changed shape, like a shapeshifter kind of thing.
Huh. Very interesting. I haven't really thought about that. Mm-hmm. Now, have you heard of Phil Schneider?
Yeah.
Now, tell me what you think about the Dulce Wars, and maybe Phil Schneider.
Yeah, well, Phil Schneider was this, he's dead now, but he was someone like a whistleblower who came forward claiming to have had employment at Dulce and knew about some of the darker, more disturbing stories where there were reportedly sort of hostile confrontations between the military and aliens, and to the point where pretty much every time we lost. We never won. And this sort of ties in with some of the stories that were told to Paul Benowitz, who was also someone who looked into Dulce, but sort of a decade or so before Schneider was on the scene. But the stories are pretty much the same, of confrontations where reportedly the military and scientific people as well, were working in the Dulce base, and there was this sort of situation where there was like a tolerance, if you like, between the aliens and us. It wasn't like a good, friendly working arrangement. It was sort of like a very antagonistic kind of dangerous situation, you know, kind of like swimming with sharks, that kind of thing. And then a lot of Snyder's stuff relates to when things got bad and, you know, people were killed under strange circumstances. There were firefights and the military retreated. The story is now that nobody has really gone back, and they don't really know what's going on down there. You know, it is like some sort of hellish no-go area, and you know, tales of people in their thousands in cages and being used in experiments.
A theory of mine, Nick, is, and I'm sure several other people have thought of this also, but with all the deep underground tunnels and underground bases such as Dulce, and I'm sure Area 51's underground too, a lot of it. And there's been rumors of Mel's Hole. You know, as you know, we talk about the inner Earth. I don't get too much in the inner Earth, but maybe one reason we don't see, it's hard to see these. Maybe these ETs, these aliens, maybe they're not traveling from light years away physically. Either one, they're coming interdimensionally, possibly. Or what I think, Nick, is if you look at a gray alien, they're gray, they're pale, they have big, large black eyes. To me, that is something that is very similar and resembles something that lives in a dark place, such as inner Earth. The black eyes. If you look at a lot of mammals, a lot of animals on Earth, bats, you know, their eyes, a lot of things that live in dark environments, they have, most of them have large black eyes, and most of them are pale. You know, possibly they are here with us, but just inner Earth.
Well, actually, there's an interesting book that was kind of written about this a few years ago by a guy named Matt Tonis, and Matt died at a very early age, like 34. He had a heart condition. But he wrote a book called The Crypto-Terrestrials. It's not a big book, because he didn't finish it before he died, but the publisher put out what was available at the time. So it's a small book. But his theory was that, just what you pointed out, the idea that maybe we're dealing with something that lives like a subterranean race, whether extraterrestrial or some sort of offshoot of the human race. You know, we're Homo sapiens today. You know, there was Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal man. Could they have been something more advanced, and they live underground? And, you know, it's an interesting theory, because I don't buy into sort of like the whole inner Earth, hollow Earth angle. But what I do think, because if you look at our technology today, you know, I mean, there are rumors about Area 51 having multiple levels, you know, 7 or 8 levels down. Denver Airport. And, you know, I mean, in China, they have one that's known as the Sanya base, which is like this, ostensibly, it's a submarine base, but there are rumors that that goes sort of deep below the ocean bed and the surrounding islands. I've heard a lot of stories when I've been to Puerto Rico on expeditions looking for the chupacabra, a lot of rumours about underground and off-sea and offshore underwater installations. In the UK, in the county of Wiltshire, there are a lot of military facilities there which have underground facilities. And a lot of them were built during the Cold War in the event of a nuclear attack, you know, where the elite and the military would go and try and, you know, continue to fight the Russians or whatever. Now, some of those facilities in Wiltshire, England, they're not rumour. You know, everybody knows where they are. And they go down, you know, hundreds and hundreds of feet, and they can house up, you know, literally tens of thousands of people with enough food for like 2 years. And that's not rumour, that's fact. And You know, then you've got other ones in the United States, like Dugway Proving Ground in Utah. We know that's got multiple levels. So if we can build these installations underground now, then who's to say that a far more advanced race thousands of years ago didn't do exactly the same thing before we knew about it, you know? And I mean, they couldn't sort of build these vast structures today without us knowing, obviously. 2,000 years ago, they could be perceived as gods, and they were doing exactly that, you know, just building these underground fortresses 3,000 years ago in Dulce, you know, etc., etc.
They did kind of get away with it at Denver, I think.
Well,
not a whole lot of people know about that.
Well, that's true. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, I think, you know, you can kind
of... It's possible.
It's kind of like hiding something in plain sight. You know, you people just say, oh, yeah, they're just building the airport. And you just don't look at it.
They're not looking at all the infrastructure that they're doing underground.
It's kind of like they, you know, on a simple parallel, you know, you kind of open the cupboard door to get the pepper out, and you're looking in front of them, you don't see it, and then you suddenly see it. You know, there's actually a condition, I forget the name of that is, when something is right in front of you, and you don't see it.
I know what you're talking about. Exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe there is a good angle with this because... what was his name with the subterranean?
Oh, Matt Tonis.
And I kind of believe in that theory, you know, because I don't think they're coming from way out there. Because there's also they call them USOs.
Yeah.
Underwater
submersible objects.
Because a lot of UFOs are seen coming out of the water, and maybe there is bases deep, either beneath the ocean, or within the subterranean world of the Earth's crust. And maybe that is just one angle of where they're actually coming from. And maybe the Bible, I don't want to get too religious, but the Bible even talks about the Watchers. Maybe that's why we have heat. Maybe that's why they're here, because they're actually watching over mankind. They're already here. They're not coming from out there. They're the Watchers. They're watching over mankind. And maybe that's the reason why UFOs have been seen to shut down nuclear weapons and bases and stuff.
Well, one of the things, I mean, when you're talking about the Bible, I mean, some researchers think the story of Jonah and the whale was actually like an abduction, you know, and the whale was really a UFO, and it was taken underwater, you know, because I mean, if you think about it, literally, you cannot live in the stomach of a whale for never mind 3 days or whatever it was,
but metaphors.
3 hours, you know, you'd be like. The whale's body, you know, stomach would start to digest you. But I mean, I remember about 20 years ago, there were a lot of rumours of, well, not rumours, but stories of sightings of UFOs coming out of the water off Iceland. And I'm sure you could probably still, this was pre-internet era, we're talking early 90s, but you could probably still find the stories. And also, going back to Puerto Rico, I've been to Puerto Rico for many occasions, you know, investigating the Chupacabra sightings. And I've got a lot of stories from there where people had seen UFOs coming out of the coastal waters, particularly at night, and particularly the black triangle type ones, literally just sort of raising up out the ocean slowly, you know, so you're not making too much of a splash, you know, or whatever, but just sort of raising up slowly and then suddenly shooting off. So I think there's definitely something weird going off the coast of Puerto Rico in terms of not necessarily underground base, but underwater bases, you know.
So to tie things up for this time, Nick, okay, the previous segment we talked about the surveillance state, Big Brother, and anti-state, and just the New World Order in general, just a little bit, because, you know, we'll be here for hours to talk about everything. So how do we need to round things off for this time? Because I do think that there is an alien agenda. Now, Jim Morris speaks about it. Many others speak about it. And I believe this agenda, we talk about a little bit about it, possibly with Project Bluebeam. You know, that could be used. But is there anything else of where they may use the alien card, or like, well, I guess, what can you say the end game alien agenda could be for the cabal, the New World Order, or what have you? Is it actually hybridization? Is it to merge us with machines or with alien DNA or what is it?
Yeah. Well, I do believe there's a genuine alien phenomenon. Now, alien, I prefer to use the term alien rather than extraterrestrial because I'm not entirely sure, are they extraterrestrial or are they sort of multi-dimensional? Or could it be both? You know, it could be both.
Possibly already here.
Yeah, or something from, you know, an ancient race that's here, who knows? But my personal view is that the phenomenon, whatever it is, exists. Now, so far, we haven't seen, as far as we know, you know, like a demonstrable, dangerous, hostile side to it. Now, that doesn't mean it's not hostile, you know, because you could make the analogy that the cows in the field never see any hostility from the farmer because he looks after and feeds them, but he still takes them to the slaughterhouse, you know. And I think it, you know, it could be like that, but we're not seeing it, you know, we're not seeing any massive hostility from the UFO phenomenon. But I do think there are people within the official world who have recognized that the UFO phenomenon can be manipulated for various reasons, and those reasons may not be good reasons. For example, I've got a number of cases where people, alien abductees, were implanted with little devices, but then the people started having weird dreams and nightmares of the implants being done by like doctors, as if somebody was sort of mind controlling the person. You know, you'll see aliens, but it was actually a cover, possibly in some cases, for the testing of implants, early implants, to see how people could be tracked, could be controlled. And well, we'll put the blame on aliens. You know, we'll use the UFO angle as a cover story. You know, shoot the person up with a bunch of mind-altering chemicals, hallucinogenics, have them, you know, the guys come in wearing an alien mask. That's the image they'll remember, but it's being done by doctors, not by aliens. So I think there's that angle to it. I think also, you know, a lot of studies have been undertaken as to how, you know, a War of the Worlds type scenario, a Project Bluebeam scenario could be undertaken using the alien meme, so to speak. So I think we're living in a world where we do have a real alien phenomenon, but we also have people right here on Earth who want to manipulate that phenomenon as a means to control us, to, you know, ensure that we toe the party line, and that we basically, you know, eventually become cattle living in a world where possibly we are living in fear of an alien threat that really doesn't exist. The alien presence exists, but the threat may be totally fabricated.
Exactly. And I believe Charles Fort talked about us being like a
cattle. Yeah, he actually said we are cattle. He felt that there was a phenomenon, but we just weren't seeing the big picture of what was going on. You know, but what the big picture could be. I mean, you have some researchers who literally think that these entities sort of thrive on human soul energy. So, you know, their theory is that when we die, they can siphon off that soul energy and feed on it. Kind of like in the Matrix movies, you know, we think we're living in just a normal world, but we're actually living in these pods, and all, you know, our electric energy is being siphoned off by the machines to allow them to live. You know, so that's the one theory, that they live on soul energy. You know, they want us to, they encourage us to sort of thrive on the planet, because the more people there are when we die, there's more soul energy to thrive on.
Do you think that?
I don't personally think that's the right answer, but there are a lot of people who do believe that is the case.
Do you think that they're using, that's the reason why there's been so much child pedophilia and abductions and elite over the world using drinking blood, because maybe this feeds them, this feeds their, I don't know.
Well,
it's very deep and dark.
Yeah,
you know,
I mean, I've not really sort of dug into those areas, but what I would say is that, you know, in terms of the UFO phenomenon, a lot of people have claimed interactions with these aliens by performing ritualistic rituals. I mean, like, I'll give you a good example. Aleister Crowley, the famous magician, you know, not like today's magicians, you know, pulling a rabbit out of a hat or, you know, sawing a hot girl in half. Not that kind of thing. We're talking about people who understood ancient magical rituals and how things could be invoked by following ritualistic teachings. Aleister Crowley conjured up this entity called Lam, L-A-M. If you look at the pictures of Lam, it looks very much like an alien grey. The only difference, the eyes aren't solid black, but it's the large bald head, little tiny shoulders, the penetrating eyes, slits for eyes and nose and mouth. Looks very similar to a grey. And yet, you know, this did not manifest by coming down in a metal UFO. Crowley was in an altered state of mind and ritualistically, essentially, invoked Lam through. So I do think, you know, there is an aspect to the presence of the UFO phenomenon in our world being tied to ancient teachings, using ritualistic ways to call them in, hallucinogenics. I think there are ways and means of invoking these things which don't necessarily relate to contacting them and saying, you know, come to land near this hangar or this runway. It's far more weirder than that. And it does involve ancient magic and rituals and secret societies who know the ways to contact these entities. And if they were just extraterrestrials, I don't think it would work like that. If they are sort of multi-dimensional and we can penetrate those dimensions, we could call them forth. So yeah, there is a ritualistic aspect to all of this. Yeah.
Very well said, Nick. And I can just keep, because this topic, this subject, it just, there are so many angles and facets and so many variables at play that it just keeps getting deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole. Yep, and you explained this very phenomenal, very well. And I thank you very much for this time.
You're welcome. Thanks,
It's
Mike.
been an honor, a pleasure, Nick.
Thank you. Thanks.